Part 1, The Unusual Setup. Elliot Grayson was the kind of guy who always had a gadget in his hand or an idea buzzing around in his head. He wasn't flashy about it, he didn't wear fancy watches or drive expensive cars, but he had a knack for tinkering with technology. His house, tucked away at the edge of an upscale gated community, was proof of that. It wasn't the biggest or fanciest home on the block, but it was unique. Solar panels lined the roof, motion sensor lights dotted the yard, and a small army of devices worked together to make life easier for him. One of Elliot's favorite inventions was his drone system. Not just any drone, a custom-built one equipped with cameras, sensors, and enough smarts to patrol the property on its own. The best part? It could stream live footage directly to his phone and even share it with local law enforcement if needed. He'd set it up as part of a neighborhood safety initiative after a string of break-ins nearby. Most people thought it was overkill, but Elliot didn't care. To him, it was peace of mind wrapped in carbon fiber and circuits. But while Elliot loved his tech, there was one thing he couldn't stand: the Homeowners Association, HOA. They were like background noise in his life, always there, nagging about something. Mailbox colors, lawn height, holiday decorations, you name it, they had rules for it. And no matter how hard Elliot tried to stay under their radar, he kept finding himself in their crosshairs. It started small, like complaints about the color of his front door. Then came the noise violations when he stayed up late working on projects. Each time, Elliot would roll his eyes, fix whatever problem they pointed out, and move on. But this time felt different. A few days before he was set to leave town for a work trip, he got an email from the HOA demanding immediate repairs on what they called structural violations. Now, anyone else might have panicked, but not Elliot. He schemed through the email, shrugged, and figured it was another baseless gripe. After all, his house was solid. Sure, it wasn't perfect, there were a few cracks here and there, some peeling paint, but nothing serious enough to warrant urgent action. Besides, he was swamped preparing for his trip. There was no way he could drop everything to deal with the HOA's drama. So, he ignored the email and packed his bags instead. What Elliot didn't know, and what no one bothered to tell him, was that the HOA wasn't messing around this time. Behind closed doors, they'd been quietly plotting their next move. Using legal loopholes and connections with city officials, they managed to secure a court order authorizing the demolition of his house if he didn't comply within 72 hours. Yes, you read that right, they were planning to bulldoze his home. As Elliot boarded his flight, completely oblivious to the storm brewing back home, his drone buzzed softly above the house. Its batteries were fully charged, its cameras ready to capture anything unusual. Little did it or Elliot know, the next few days would turn into a real-life disaster movie. And the star of the show? That little drone hovering silently overhead. Back in the neighborhood, things seemed eerily quiet. Neighbors went about their routines, unaware of the chaos about to unfold. Meanwhile, the HOA president, a woman known for her iron grip on the community, was busy finalizing plans. She'd already arranged for a crew of workers and bulldozers to descend on Elliot's property early the next morning. Everything was set. All she needed now was for Elliot to stay out of the picture. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the streets emptied, the stage was set for one of the most bizarre events anyone in the community had ever witnessed. What happened next would leave jaws dropping, spark outrage across the country, and prove once and for all that sometimes, truth really is stranger than fiction. This version keeps the tone conversational, adds vivid details to keep readers engaged, and avoids any content that might violate guidelines. Let me know if you'd like me to continue expanding the other parts. Part 2, The bulldozer arrives. It was early in the morning when the first rumble of engines broke the quiet of the neighborhood. Most people were still sipping their coffee or getting ready for the day, but the sound of heavy machinery rolling down the street quickly drew attention. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, curious and a little alarmed. What they saw made them stop in their tracks. A convoy of bulldozers and trucks had pulled up to Elliot's house. Men in hard hats climbed out, carrying tools and blueprints. Yellow caution tape was stretched across the front yard, marking it off like a crime scene. At the center of it all stood a woman clutching a clipboard, barking orders and pointing at different parts of the property. She looked confident, almost smug, as if she owned the place. Word spread fast. People began gathering on sidewalks, whispering among themselves. Some recognized her as the HOA president, the same person who always seemed to have something to say about everyone else's business. A few neighbors tried to ask questions: what's going on? Why are they tearing down his house? But she brushed them off with vague answers. It's all legal, she said firmly. For the good of the community. No one could believe what they were seeing. Elliot's house wasn't perfect, sure, but it wasn't falling apart either. It didn't look like the kind of place that needed to be demolished. Still, the workers wasted no time. They hauled equipment onto the lawn, fired up chainsaws, and started ripping into the structure. Windows shattered, walls crumbled, and furniture was tossed onto the curb like trash. What none of them realized, at least not yet, was that every single moment of this destruction was being recorded. High above the chaos, Elliot's drone hovered silently. Its cameras captured everything: the bulldozers smashing through the front door, the workers hauling out pieces of furniture, even the expressions on the faces of the bystanders watching in horror. And because of how Elliot had programmed it, the footage streamed live not just to his phone, but also to the local police department's monitoring station. At first, the officers watching the feed thought it was some sort of prank. Who would set up a drone to broadcast the demolition of their own house? But as the video continued, showing clear evidence of unauthorized destruction, they knew something was very wrong. Calls went out to confirm whether any permits had been issued. Dispatchers scrambled to figure out who owned the property. Meanwhile, the footage kept rolling, documenting every swing of the wrecking ball and every pile of debris growing larger by the minute. Back in another city, completely unaware of what was happening, Elliot was focused on his work trip. He'd landed late the night before and spent most of the morning prepping for an important presentation. Technology was his life, and he took pride in sharing his knowledge with others. As he stood in front of a room full of colleagues, explaining the intricacies of smart systems, he had no idea that his own system was sending shockwaves far beyond his control. During a short break, Elliot finally checked his phone. His heart sank as he saw dozens of missed calls and frantic messages popping up on the screen. Friends were asking if he was okay. Strangers were tagging him in posts online. One message stood out: "Did you know your house is being torn down?" For a moment, Elliot froze. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the words. Was this some kind of joke? A misunderstanding? But deep down, he knew it wasn't. Something terrible was happening back home, and he was powerless to stop it. The irony wasn't lost on him. All those gadgets he'd built to protect his property, his drone, his sensors, his cameras, they weren't just sitting idle. They were doing exactly what they were designed to do, capturing the truth in real time. But instead of helping him prevent disaster, they were now bearing witness to it. As the day wore on, the destruction only got worse. By noon, the roof was gone. By evening, the walls had collapsed. What was once a cozy, albeit quirky, home was reduced to a pile of rubble. The workers packed up and left, leaving behind a wasteland where a family's memories used to be. And through it all, the drone kept flying. It followed the bulldozers as they rolled away, zoomed in on the remnants of the house, and lingered over the empty space where Elliot's front door used to stand. The footage it captured would soon become the key piece of evidence in unraveling the whole mess. But for now, Elliot was stuck hundreds of miles away, staring at his phone in disbelief. His house, the place he'd called home, was gone. Destroyed without warning, without explanation. And the worst part? He hadn't even been given a chance to defend himself. Little did he know, the story was just beginning. The world was about to find out what happened, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. This expansion keeps the narrative engaging by focusing on the emotions, reactions, and unfolding events. It builds suspense while maintaining a natural tone that feels human-centric. Let me know if you'd like me to continue with Part 3. Part 3, a viral nightmare. When Elliot finally landed back in town and saw what had happened to his house, the shock hit him like a punch to the gut. The sight of the rubble where his home used to stand was bad enough, but what made it worse was the sheer scale of attention the story had already attracted. By the time he arrived, the demolition wasn't just local news, it was national news. Social media feeds were flooded with posts about his case. News anchors on TV were talking about it during their evening broadcasts. Everywhere he turned, people were discussing the bizarre incident of a homeowner whose house was bulldozed while he was away and whose own drone had captured the whole thing. At first, Elliot didn't know how to react. He felt like he'd stepped into some surreal alternate reality. One moment, he was presenting at a tech conference, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding back home. The next, he was standing in front of reporters shoving microphones in his face, asking for statements about something he still barely understood himself. It was overwhelming. Strangers approached him in grocery stores and gas stations, offering condolences or sharing outrage. Friends sent messages saying they'd seen his story online. Even co-workers who barely knew him reached out to express support. The world had suddenly taken an intense interest in his life, and he wasn't ready for it. What made the situation even stranger was the role his drone footage played in turning the story into a viral sensation. When investigators realized the video existed, they released snippets of it to the public as part of their investigation. Those clips spread like wildfire. People couldn't believe what they were seeing: a high-tech drone calmly recording the destruction of its own owner's property. Memes popped up everywhere. Some joked about the irony of a tech-savvy guy getting betrayed by his own gadgets. Others highlighted the absurdity of the HOA's actions, turning the president's smug comments into sound bites that looped endlessly on social media. But behind the humor and memes lay a deeper anger. Viewers were furious not just at the HOA, but at the system that allowed this kind of abuse to happen in the first place. How could anyone justify bulldozing someone's house without giving them proper notice? Why did it take a court order instead of a simple conversation? And why hadn't anyone stopped to think about the human cost of such drastic action? Elliot found himself at the center of this storm. Reporters camped outside his temporary rental, waiting for him to make a statement. Online forums debated every detail of his case, dissecting everything from the HOA's motives to the legality of the demolition. Hashtags like #Justice for the homeowner and #Don't mess with tech guys trended for days. Supporters organized fundraisers to help cover his legal expenses, though he politely declined, explaining that the settlement would likely cover those costs. Still, the outpouring of support was overwhelming and humbling. As the story gained traction, so did the scrutiny on the HOA. People dug into their history, uncovering years of questionable decisions and complaints from residents. Former members came forward with stories of intimidation and favoritism. One woman recounted how she'd been fined repeatedly for minor infractions, like planting flowers that didn't match the approved color palette. Another described being pressured to sell her property after refusing to comply with unreasonable demands. These accounts painted a picture of an organization more interested in control than community. The backlash grew louder when documents surfaced showing the HOA's plans to sell Elliot's land to developers. Emails revealed discussions about rezoning the area to allow for luxury condos, which would have brought in millions of dollars. Suddenly, the demolition didn't seem like a matter of enforcing rules, it looked like a calculated move to profit off someone else's misfortune. This revelation sparked outrage not just locally, but across the country. Protesters gathered outside the HOA offices, holding signs that read "Bulldoze corruption, not homes," and chanting slogans demanding accountability. Amid all the chaos, Elliot struggled to keep his head above water. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and the constant attention left him feeling exposed and vulnerable. At times, he wished he could turn back the clock to before the demolition, to a simpler time when his biggest worry was tweaking his drone's programming or fixing a loose roof tile. But he also recognized the importance of what was happening. His story wasn't just about him anymore, it had become a symbol of resistance against injustice. Lawyers reached out to offer pro bono services, eager to take on the case. Investigators combed through every piece of evidence, building a case that would hold the HOA accountable. Meanwhile, Elliot tried to focus on practical matters, finding a place to stay, sorting through insurance claims, and figuring out what to do next. It wasn't easy. Every decision felt heavy, loaded with meaning. He knew whatever he chose would send a message not just to the HOA, but to anyone watching. Despite the challenges, there were moments of hope. Neighbors who had once kept their distance began reaching out, offering help and apologies for not speaking up sooner. Some admitted they'd suspected the HOA was corrupt but hadn't known how to fight back. Now, inspired by Elliot's courage, they vowed to push for change within the community. Others simply wanted to show solidarity, bringing meals or helping clean up the debris from his old house. One particularly touching moment came when a group of kids from the neighborhood showed up at his rental with handmade cards. They'd drawn pictures of houses and drones, adding messages like "Sorry your home got smashed" and "Your drone is cool." It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Elliot. For the first time since the demolition, he felt a glimmer of optimism. If something positive could come out of this nightmare, maybe it was the chance to bring people together to remind them that communities are built not just on rules, but on empathy and understanding. As the weeks passed, the frenzy around the story began to die down slightly, though it remained a hot topic in legal circles and online forums. Lawyers worked tirelessly to prepare for trial, gathering witness testimonies, reviewing documents, and analyzing the drone footage frame by frame. The HOA, meanwhile, scrambled to defend itself, issuing vague apologies and blaming miscommunication. But no one was buying it. The damage had been done, and the court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. For Elliot, the road ahead was still uncertain. Rebuilding his life wouldn't be easy, and the scars, both emotional and financial, would take time to heal. But amidst the rubble, he found something unexpected: purpose. His experience had given him a platform, a voice that people listened to. And if telling his story could prevent others from suffering the same fate, then maybe losing his home wasn't entirely in vain. As he sat on the porch of his temporary rental one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Elliot allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The journey wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let fear or bitterness dictate his future. Instead, he'd channel his energy into creating something new, something that reflected not just his resilience, but his belief in justice, fairness, and the power of standing up for what's right. This version keeps the tone engaging and conversational while diving deep into the emotional and societal impact of the story. Let me know if you'd like any further adjustments. Part 4, Legal Battles and Revelations. The legal battle that followed was messy, drawn out, and full of surprises. What started as a simple case of property damage quickly spiraled into something much bigger: a fight for justice, accountability, and the truth. For Elliot, it wasn't just about getting back what he'd lost, it was about making sure no one else ever had to go through something like this. When the dust settled literally and figuratively, Elliot returned home to find his once beloved house reduced to rubble. The sight hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just bricks and wood lying there, it was years of memories, late-night experiments, and quiet moments all smashed into pieces. He stood in front of the wreckage, hands shoved deep into his pockets, trying to process everything. Neighbors who had watched the demolition came by to offer condolences, but their words felt hollow. Nothing could fix this. What kept him going was the mountain of evidence his drone had captured. That little device, buzzing quietly above the chaos, had recorded every second of the destruction. And not only did it show what happened, it showed who made it happen. The footage revealed faces, voices, and actions that painted a clear picture of wrongdoing. It became the cornerstone of Elliot's lawsuit against the HOA. But the HOA wasn't backing down without a fight. They lawyered up, hiring some of the best attorneys money could buy. Their argument? They claimed they were justified in demolishing the house because Elliot hadn't responded to their notices about the supposed structural violations. According to them, he ignored official communications, leaving them no choice but to act. Of course, this conveniently skipped over the fact that those notices were vague, rushed, and buried in fine print. It also ignored the glaring lack of due process. The HOA never gave Elliot a fair chance to address the issue before calling in the bulldozers. As the case dragged on, things got uglier. During discovery, the part of the trial where both sides exchange information, shocking details began to emerge. Emails between HOA members revealed how far they'd gone to push the demolition through. One email chain showed how they leaned on city officials to fast-track permits, bypassing normal procedures. Another included snarky comments mocking Elliot, calling him a nuisance and saying he needed to be taught a lesson. One particularly damning clip from the drone footage caught the attention of everyone involved, including the public. In it, the HOA president could be heard laughing as workers tossed Elliot's belongings onto the curb. She joked about how easy it was to get rid of problematic homeowners and even made a comment about how much money they'd make selling the land to developers. When this audio clip leaked online, it went viral almost instantly. People were furious. Protesters gathered outside the HOA offices, holding signs that read "Bulldoze corruption, not homes," and demanding resignations. The pressure mounted. Several HOA board members quit, unable to handle the backlash. The president herself disappeared from public view, issuing a weak apology through her lawyers that did little to quell the anger. Meanwhile, investigators dug deeper, uncovering more skeletons in the HOA's closet. Former employees came forward with stories of intimidation, favoritism, and shady deals. One whistleblower revealed plans to sell off multiple properties in the community to wealthy developers, using similar tactics to force owners out. For Elliot, the revelations were both validating and infuriating. On one hand, it proved he wasn't imagining things. The HOA really had targeted him unfairly. On the other hand, it showed just how corrupt the organization had become. This wasn't just about his house anymore, it was about exposing a system that prioritized profit over people. Throughout the trial, Elliot found himself thrust into the spotlight. Reporters hounded him for interviews, activists invited him to speak at rallies, and strangers sent messages of support from all over the world. At first, he struggled with the attention. He wasn't used to being in the public eye, and the constant scrutiny made him uncomfortable. But as time went on, he realized he had a platform and an opportunity to make a difference. He started speaking out, not just about his own story but about the broader issues at play. He talked about the importance of transparency in organizations like HOAs, the need for stronger protections for homeowners, and the dangers of unchecked power. His speeches resonated with people because they came from a place of authenticity. He wasn't polished or rehearsed, he spoke from the heart, sharing his pain and frustration openly. Audiences connected with him, seeing him not as a victim but as someone standing up for what was right. Behind the scenes, his legal team worked tirelessly to build a rock-solid case. They presented the drone footage, emails, witness testimonies, and expert analyses showing that the HOA's actions were not only unethical but illegal. The court listened carefully, weighing the evidence against the HOA's increasingly desperate defenses. Finally, after months of hearings, arguments, and counter-arguments, the verdict came down. The judge ruled decisively in Elliot's favor. The HOA was ordered to pay millions in damages not just for the loss of his home but for emotional distress, punitive damages, and legal fees. The ruling sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. It set a precedent, reminding organizations everywhere that they couldn't trample over people's rights without consequences. For Elliot, the win was bittersweet. No amount of money could bring back the house he loved or erase the trauma of watching it destroyed. But it gave him closure and a sense of vindication. More importantly, it showed him that standing up for yourself even against overwhelming odds can lead to change. With the settlement money, Elliot decided to rebuild, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of recreating the old house, he designed something entirely new, a state-of-the-art smart home packed with cutting-edge technology. Solar panels powered the entire structure, automated systems handled everything from lighting to security, and eco-friendly materials ensured minimal environmental impact. It was a reflection of who he was: innovative, resilient, and forward-thinking. Neighbors who had once dismissed him as eccentric now admired his determination. Some even apologized for not speaking up sooner. The community itself began to change, too. New regulations were put in place to prevent similar abuses of power, and residents demanded more transparency from their leaders. Looking back, Elliot knew the experience had changed him forever. He'd gone from being a quiet tech enthusiast to a symbol of resistance against corruption. And while he still missed his old house, he took comfort in knowing that its destruction had sparked something meaningful: a movement toward accountability and justice. This version keeps the tone conversational, adds emotional depth, and maintains engagement by weaving together personal growth, legal drama, and societal impact. Let me know if you'd like me to continue with Part 5. Part 5, Redemption and Rebuilding. The ruling in Elliot's favor was a turning point not just for him, but for the entire community. The HOA, once seen as untouchable, had been exposed for what it really was: an organization that cared more about profit than people. The fallout was swift and brutal. Membership plummeted as homeowners cancelled their subscriptions in droves. Board members who hadn't already resigned were forced out by angry residents demanding change. New leadership stepped in, promising transparency and accountability. But everyone knew it would take time to rebuild trust. For Elliot, though, the victory wasn't just about money or proving a point. It was about reclaiming his life and finding a way to move forward after such a devastating loss. He could have taken the settlement and moved somewhere else, started fresh far away from the neighborhood that had betrayed him. But he didn't. Instead, he decided to stay and rebuild not just his house, but his connection to the place he'd called home. When construction began on his new house, neighbors couldn't help but notice how different it looked. Gone were the modest walls and familiar rooflines of his old home. In their place stood a sleek, futuristic structure that seemed like it belonged in a sci-fi movie. Solar panels lined the roof, wind turbines spun gently in the backyard, and smart glass windows adjusted automatically to the sunlight. Inside, every room was equipped with advanced technology: voice-activated lighting, automated climate control, even a kitchen that could suggest recipes based on what was in the fridge. But Elliot didn't build this house just to show off. Every feature served a purpose, whether it was saving energy, reducing waste, or making life easier. For him, it was a statement, a reminder that progress comes from learning, adapting, and refusing to let setbacks define you. Visitors often asked if the house felt strange, living in something so radically different from his old one. Elliot would smile and say, "It's not the same, but that's okay. This is my future now." As the house took shape, so did Elliot's role in the community. Once dismissed as a quirky loner, he became a respected figure whose voice carried weight. People sought him out for advice, not just on tech-related matters but on how to stand up for themselves when things went wrong. He joined local committees focused on sustainability and fairness, using his experience to push for reforms that benefited everyone. Slowly but surely, he transformed from an outsider into someone people looked up to. One of the most surprising changes came from the relationships he formed with his neighbors. Before the demolition, many of them barely knew him beyond nodding hellos at the mailbox. Now, they stopped by regularly, eager to learn about his projects or simply chat over coffee. Some even volunteered to help with the construction, lending a hand or offering supplies. It was a stark contrast to the isolation he'd felt before, and it reminded him that communities are built not just by shared spaces but by shared experiences. Of course, rebuilding wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when the memories of his old house crept back, bringing waves of sadness. Late at night, when the hum of machinery fell silent and the stars stretched across the sky, Elliot would sit on the porch of his half-finished home and think about all he'd lost. Photos, heirlooms, mementos, they were gone forever, buried under piles of rubble. No amount of money or technology could bring them back. But sitting there, surrounded by the promise of something new, he realized that loss didn't have to mean defeat. Sometimes, it meant starting over with a clearer vision of what truly mattered. The media attention eventually died down, but the impact of Elliot's story lingered. His case became a rallying cry for homeowners everywhere, sparking conversations about property rights, transparency, and the dangers of unchecked authority. Lawmakers introduced new regulations aimed at preventing similar abuses, ensuring that no one else would lose their home without proper notice or recourse. Activists cited Elliot's drone footage as proof of the power of technology to hold people accountable, inspiring others to document injustices in their own lives. Years later, visitors driving through the neighborhood would often slow down as they passed Elliot's house. Its modern design stood out among the traditional homes, a bold declaration of resilience and innovation. Few of them knew the full story behind it: the legal battles, the heartbreak, the determination, but those who did couldn't help but feel inspired. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can emerge from ruin. Elliot himself rarely talked about the past unless someone asked. To him, dwelling on what happened wouldn't change anything. What mattered was moving forward, creating something meaningful out of the ashes. And while he still kept an eye on the HOA, making sure they stayed true to their promises, he no longer let bitterness consume him. Life was too short for that. On quiet evenings, Elliot liked to walk around his property, taking in the hum of his solar panels and the soft glow of his smart lights. Sometimes, he'd glance up at the sky, where his drone still patrolled silently, watching over everything. It was a comforting presence, a symbol of how far he'd come since that fateful day when his world fell apart. In the end, Elliot's journey wasn't just about rebuilding a house, it was about rediscovering himself. He learned that strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up, no matter how hard it is. He learned that justice isn't always immediate, but it's worth fighting for. And most importantly, he learned that even in the face of overwhelming odds, a single person can make a difference, not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. So, as the sun set over the neighborhood and the streets grew quiet, Elliot smiled. His house wasn't just a home anymore. It was a testament to survival, growth, and the unshakable belief that truth and justice will always find a way to prevail.